Hey, software developers, what is going on? I'm the Savage Coder, and in this episode, we're going to change things up. I found myself explaining some things in React to someone the other day, and I thought, wow, that was more in depth than I've actually covered on this YouTube channel. So I'm going to take a break from our application development with the MVC and the Web API, and we're going to focus a little bit on the React side of things, how to get it set up, how does it work under the covers, and kind of how to build and how to approach things with React, which is a different approach than you would take to other frameworks. Most of the JavaScript frameworks are similar, but other things like MVC and C# and things like that, you really take kind of a different approach. And so I wanted to explain all of that. We're going to start a new repo in the GitHub channel, and that repo is called React Base. We're going to create a brand new React app from scratch, look at how it works, get it deployed to the cloud. We'll do Azure, maybe AWS, and maybe GCP. Don't know. Haven't thought about that one yet, but we could. And talk about some things like CI/CD and really how to get this thing up and running so you can build an app and get it deployed and understand what needs to happen and why things are the way they are. So hopefully this is something that you wanted to learn. It's something that I think will be really fun. And hopefully this is a good little break. And then after that, maybe we'll get back to the original building of that application. So hopefully this is good stuff. Let's get into the React and see how this all works. But first, all right, so let's get started. I'm going to open up a new terminal, and I'm going to go to my projects directory and my Episode-32. I created a directory just called Episode-32 React Intro. And what I want to do here is create a project called React Base, and we can use that project to demo features like Tailwind CSS or Material UI or Axios or any of the other things we want. We can use this project to deploy to the different cloud providers and how to set up CI/CD and do some testing and all kind of things. So let's create that basic application. Prerequisite here, you do need Node.js. So if you don't have Node.js, go ahead and download and install that. You can Google that. Very easy to find. Once you have that, we use the npx from the Node package, and npx will download anything that you don't have before it tries to run it, where npm run will just run or npm install installs. We don't actually want to install the Create React app, which looks like that. The reason we don't want to install that is that version changes as React changes. So we always want the latest one. So npx will at least go out and it will download the latest one for us. The two flags I'm going to use here are use-npm. So --use-npm. I'm using npm instead of yarn. If you like yarn better, feel free. Personal preference, you shouldn't really see any difference there. The other thing we're going to use is --template space TypeScript. And TypeScript is just a data typing layer on top of JavaScript. Once you hit enter, it may ask you yes or no. What did I get something wrong here? Oh, no! Haha, I forgot the application name. So, let's clear that and go back to that. So after Create React App, I'm going to create something called React Base. and we'll leave those flags. Sometimes when you hit enter here, it'll ask you if you want to install Create React App from npx. You can say yes to that. Mine probably won't ask because I've done this already. All right, and once we see the happy hacking, we know we are good to go. So before I cd react base and then npm start, I want to open the code in VS Code and reopen this terminal. So I'm going to go to this open folder, and I'm going to navigate down to my projects, Episode-32, React Base. That's what we just created, and select that folder. And then I'm going to go to Terminal, New Terminal. I think I missed that. There we go. Cool. So one of the things that the Create React app gives us is this Git Ignore, which is really cool. It will not check in your node modules. So make sure when you pull code from a Git repo that you do an npm install before you try and run it, or you'll see all kind of errors. So let's take a look at what we have here as far as a structure. We have our source, which contains the React guts. We have this public folder. We have our node modules. And then we have our package JSON and the tsconfig. So package JSON, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because this is pretty standard stuff for any of the JavaScript NPM relied upon packages, whether you're doing Node or whether you're doing React or anything else JavaScript. But basically, it describes your project. It lists all of the dependencies. So any NPM installs that you do will show up either in a dependency here or as a dev dependency. We don't even have one in here right now. And also the next important part is the scripts section. So we can npm start will just run the React scripts start. And we'll talk about why you need React scripts in a minute. There's a npm run build will run the React scripts with the build argument, and that will create a deployment production build of your site. There's the npm run test, which will run our testing library tests if we have tests in our source tree. And then we have the eject, which you almost never want to do, especially if you're a beginner. So let me explain eject. When we run our scripts here, notice everything is running a React-scripts. That's the name of a script for React. That takes care of things like Webpack and all of our dependencies, any commands that we need to build. There are a lot of configs that are hidden from us. And React scripts is what hides them for us. It keeps this whole React project very simple, easy to use. You just add your code and go. You run it, you build it, and that's it. Well, sometimes you need to make some really complex or out of the ordinary changes. Sometimes you have to hack a Webpack if you want it to do something specific, maybe for one of your deployment requirements, and you don't have access to the Webpack config file that you need. So in those weird cases, you would eject, and what it does is it installs all the things that React scripts takes care of, and it gives it to you with its own dependencies and its own config files, and then it's completely up to you to maintain all of that. The downside of ejecting is once you eject, you cannot uneject. It is done. The other thing is we can upgrade React scripts as new versions of React come out, and it makes your project easy to upgrade to new versions of React. Once you eject, you technically can do it, but they don't guarantee that it's just going to work like it will if you don't eject. So enough on that subject. Inside our package.json is all of these npm modules and types. Anything with @types on it is a separate type definition for an installed package. What I mean by that is create React app installed React DOM, and it put in 17.0.2 for the version of React DOM. Well, since we have TypeScript, we needed the typings for React DOM, what data types it uses. So we also installed, and Create React App did this for us, the data types for React DOM. Now notice the types definition does not necessarily have to match the installed package version. So that can get a little confusing as to which version of the types goes with which version of NPM module. Luckily, nowadays, TypeScript is so prevalent out there, many of the things that we download don't have their own types. The types are built in and they come with the NPM package. So just doing an NPM install will bring down the types. If you happen to bring something down and it says, I don't know what this type is, try searching for @types/ and the name of your module. Chances are someone already made type definitions for it. When you install these, they all go under node modules. So inside here is going to be everything in dependencies and then everything that React comes with as well. Everything that these scripts, the React scripts, rely on, things like that. But if I wanted to go look for the actual React package, I could find them under node modules in the Rs. And there's React. And if things get really messed up for you and you ever want to remove your node modules to make sure that you're only reloading the versions that are here, you can delete node modules and just do an npm install, and it will rebuild the node modules from what's in your package JSON. All right, your public folder is your actual web page, and this starts to get into the single page or SPA design, SPA standing for single page architecture, and how React actually does what it does. Everything boils down to this index.html page. And so let's spend a minute looking at index.html in the public folder. Index.html is a simple HTML page. It has the viewport set so that you can make responsive websites that work on mobile devices. It has your standard icons for Apple Touch. It links to a manifest file. It has a head section with a title. It has a body. And it has two tags in the body that render. One of them is a no script. You will only see this if you're in a browser and you have JavaScript turned off. And it'll just tell the person you need to enable JavaScript to run this app. Obviously, React is a JavaScript framework. If you can't run JavaScript, you can't run the React site. And all the real magic happens with this div ID root. We will build a React component. That is a set of functions or classes, and we will use those JavaScript objects to render out what we want the user to see. We will attach our entire UI, our entire site, to this div node or this div element, and all of our web code will end up in between this div and /div. If you delete this div from this index.html, then your site will have nothing to attach to and it won't run. So what do I mean by that? Let's go back to our code. Just don't forget about this ID root and the fact that in a CSS file, if we wanted to style this div, if we had, let's say we had a style tag here, we could do ID and then, padding 20 pixels. Right, that's valid. And that the pound or hashtag here that we're looking at for ID says, and you can see it even lights up the ID, that symbol means ID. So I'm saying find the ID called ID in our body here, which is right there, and then apply a style. So we're going to look that up in JavaScript in code in order to attach our site to div. So let's see where that happens, and that's inside source. If we go to our index.tsx, there is a command here called react DOM app.render. React DOM is a namespace inside the React DOM npm package that comes with React, and it has a function that says render. It's rendering. This React comes from our React import, and it sets strict mode on any child inside of it. And the child inside of it is called app, which comes from another file in this same directory called app.tsx. And here's app.tsx right here. But before we go looking what app does, what's important is there's a comma here, and what we're doing is we're taking this JSX and we're turning it into JavaScript. We're taking the output of this JSX and we're attaching it to the document.getElementById root. Well, remember, the ID root was back in this index.html in the public folder. So it's finding this div with the ID of root. And once it has that document, it attaches this code into that div. And so really all that's happening here is all of the children of this JSX gets rendered into root. JSX, while it looks like HTML, it's actually a syntax extension of JavaScript. So you can think of anytime you see anything that looks like HTML inside a return or a render in React, just think of that as actual JavaScript functions and classes. And it's just an easier way to kind of look at that. So what actually gets rendered here? Let's do an npm start. And here's the web page that we get. So here's the page. It's basically got a graphic that's spinning. It's got some text, edit source app.tsx and save to reload, and a link to learn React. Where is this coming from? Well, I can guarantee you that that is coming from this app node, which we said is in the current directory in app.tsx. So if we look at that, we have a function called app that is returning JSX. Remember, this is basically JavaScript. And then we're exporting app so that we can import it on other pages. And so we export app here, we import it here, and then we can use it once we import it. But we define it here in its own file, and in our return, we have a div and a header and image tag, p tag. This looks like HTML, and it's meant to look like HTML because we use it like HTML, but it is not actually HTML. So we can do other things with this that we cannot do with HTML. So first thing is, notice class name is not class. In regular HTML, that would just be class equal. But we have class and we have a camel case name because it's actually a JavaScript property. And we can't use the word class because in JavaScript we already have a class. We can create a JavaScript class. And so we needed to use a different name here that does what a class does, but we couldn't use the actual word. And just like you think, this app here is nothing more than a CSS class, and the CSS is imported here. It says in the same directory app.csx, .css. And if we look in the app CSS for a class name called app, we would find that. And here it is right at the top, the dot meaning class, and app just says text align center. What happens is this function returns this div and all of its children, and it exports that as app. App is then rendered out to and attached to the root, and that's how we see it on the web page. So all we really have to be concerned about to build a React app is to keep building children that eventually bubble up to this app. Or we can replace the app, we can surround the app with more things, but ultimately we're going to have a child of app be our content, and we can put all different things in there to build a whole website with. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rid of everything except the outer div. I'm going to delete that. Now I have GitHub Copilot installed as a beta, so you'll see a lot of this shaded suggestion on what I should possibly need. That's the machine learning trying to guess and help me type. Sometimes I'll take it, sometimes I won't. In this case, I'm not going to. So the first thing I want to talk about with React is, where do you start, right? So I'm going to get rid of this logo. We don't need this import of React. You can actually, and I'm not even going to use any of the classes in app CSS, so I'm going to delete all of those. And we'll leave the import. I may add some styles, but right now I don't have any styles. I'm just going to put an H1 and how do you not start with hello world? So when I save that, the UI will update and we have our hello world. In order for any application to do anything, it has to have state somewhere. Let's do a simple binding of a text box to a label, because that's always, it kind of shows you some of the power that you're going to have. So if I put an input type equal text, sure, we'll put enter your name, thank you, GitHub Copilot. And then after that, we want, let's just put a div. And what I want is when I type in, if I save that, I have a text box here. Let me make that bigger. So we will use some classes here. So I'll do class name equal, and we'll call this we'll call it name-input. And so if I go in here and do a dot name-input, I'll take what Copilot gave me. Let's see what it looks like. Much better. Okay, so if I put in my name here, whatever I type, right? Whatever I type, nothing's happening. It's just going in the box. And the reason for that is I haven't really given it anything to do. I haven't stored what I'm typing anywhere. So what I want to do is I want to, when I type, I want it to do something, right? When I on change, I want it to do something, and whatever value, see if I put a value equal, let's get rid of the on change for a second. If I put something in the value, right, hello there, and save that, it puts hello there in the box because that's the value of the text box. It's kind of going off the screen there. So if I could control this value, then I can control what goes in the text box. If I control the changes, if I tell it, hey, every time you change, do something, then I could put that something in between this div so that whatever I change goes here. So I kind of need like a variable, right? If I could capture what was changing, I could display that variable in this div. And so we're going to use state to do that. State is like variables that you can change. And in a function, we use something called a state hook, which is called useState. So in order to use useState, I'm going to have to import it from React. So I'm going to put useState from React. And now inside my function, I can create a constant called name, and then I'll explain what that set name is in a second. And then we use state, and we're gonna default. Oops. Can't type today. Okay. So what does this mean? I'm calling useState and I'm saying, hey, set me up a state variable. Start it off initially with nothing in it. Just quote, quote, empty string is the value that I'm starting with. The variable is called name. So I can go into this value and get rid of the quotes here. And if I use curly braces, what I'm telling my JSX is that I'm going to use JavaScript code in here or TypeScript code inside here. It's going to be React stuff. So in here, I want to tell it, I want to tell it name. So let's get rid of onChange for a second. I'm going to leave name in there as a value. And that way you can see it. And so name should have quote, quote, because that was the initial value of name. And if we go back, you see it just says enter your name, which is just this placeholder text when nothing is in the text box. So if I said the default value was in capitals Savage Coder and save that, then because name is using that value, Savage Coder is the default value. And then if I change name, then it'll override the default value. So I want it to be empty to start. And that brings me to the next thing. How do we change name? You can't just say name equals. And that's because of how hooks work, which we'll get into more later. But we are given, when we create useState, we're given back an array of a variable and a function. SetName is actually a function, and we can use that function to set a new value into the name variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my onChange back, and in there, onChange is an event that sends an event argument, and we can use an arrow operator to then call setName, and it's a method, and we're going to send event.target.value. So what does this mean? Anytime we change the value of the input, onChange is going to fire. So for every key that I type, onChange is going to fire. It's going to cause an event to happen, and in the method that it calls, right, this is just basically calling this inline method with this arrow function. Event.target is actually the input box itself from the rendered HTML, and value will read the value, which is the change that we caused by typing. So every time we add anything to the text box, setName will get called with the full value of what's in there. So if I type a J, setName will be J, name will be J. If I hit E next, so that JE is in the box, then setName will get called with the value JE, and that will be the name, and that will be set as the value in the text box. So in addition to that, I can open up curly braces here and say, hey, just print out whatever is in name. And maybe instead of a div, let's make that an H3, a little bit smaller than the H1. So let's save that. And now when I type in here, you see the change is being reflected because that state is being updated. If we inspect this, let me bring my inspection down here. If you notice, when I type in here, the parts of the UI or the output of React that change flash in blue in these developer tools, right? And so what I'm showing you here is that really the only part of this that's getting updated is the value and the H3. Notice nothing else is lighting up. And that's because React is smart enough and modify only the part of the UI that needs updating. Everything else is left alone. And that's part of what makes it so fast and so responsive to users. The other way that we can use our state is inside other components. And we can pass those in. But when we pass a value to a child component, we pass it as a property of that component. So let's see how we can do that. I'm just going to go inside source here, and I'm going to create a new file, and we're just going to call it mychild.tsx. Mychild.tsx needs to have the bare minimum. So I am going to use an add-in that I have that is this ES7 React Redux React Native Snippets. And that is going to give me a bunch of different snippet shortcuts that I can use to create functions and functional components and classes and all that other stuff. So let me go back to my child, and I'm going to use the TS for TypeScript and then RFC. And it's, of course, not working. Why are you not working? It looks like they broke something in VS Code Insiders. And this isn't working. Okay, so this is my child TSX. I don't know why my plugin, my extension for React isn't working, but it's not working. So I just copied this from another project that is the output of that tsrfce or tsrfc command or snippet. So what this gives us is, this gives us a function called mychild, and it takes in some props, and we don't have any right now. The props are defined by this type right here, so we can make that whatever we want. And this function, mychild, returns the data type React element, which is defined inside React. So when we see this colon React element, that's just part of TypeScript. The return here returns an empty element with an H1. This empty element is useful if you want to use partials. Functions have to return one single JavaScript JSX node. So if I had, let's say, 2 of these, that's fine because they're 2 inside a child, a single child. As long as we're returning a single child, we're fine. So if I got rid of this and it's closing, it's going to complain because now I'm trying to return 2 elements instead of 1 element, right? It must have 1 parent. So if I could put just a div here, but if I don't want the div to render in my HTML, I can just return this, and this won't actually render anything. It'll just handle this as if it's a single JavaScript return for this mychild function. So let's go back to our app here, and let's say that we want to pass this name state variable into our mychild component. And so we can just say, you know, hello from my child. And then we'll make this one an H3 that says my child sends back. And what we're going to put in here is we want to repeat back or echo back what the child is receiving from the parent. So we're going to go into props and we're going to define what it is that we're sending. So we're going to send name, right? And it's just a string. So in our props, we can go in here and we can say, hey, I'm going to send you a name, and it's going to be a string. And now, right now, this is required, meaning I won't be able to use my child without sending back a name, and which is fine. If I wanted to make it an optional parameter, I could put a question mark there, making it optional, but then I have to know that I'm going to have to handle that if I use that anywhere, because it could come in as undefined if we don't send anything. But I'm going to leave it as a required property right now. And then we could just go in here and say I have a value called props. It's of type props. That's this props here. And then down here, I could just do props.name. And that'll work fine. And because we're using TypeScript, when I hit dot, you actually see that it has name here. So there's no real reason for me to use the word props here. I can deconstruct that prop, and I can just say grab name out of props. And then I can just use the name variable right in here. The important thing to know about props is that props are immutable, so they can't be changed. So we can't reset this name from here. If we wanted to change name, we would have to raise an event back up to the parent and have the parent change it in its state and send that change back down as a name. And we'll get into who owns all of the logic and all of the data in a React app in a future episode. So now let's just use this my child with our name, and we will send that back up to our web page. So in order to use my child, we have to export it. It's already being exported on this line, export default, which default means it's the only thing exported from this file, and we don't need curly braces to import it. So knowing that, I can go back to my app, and I can import my child from, and in here, my child is in the same directory, so /mychild. And then below the H3, I'm just going to put an HR, or horizontal rule, and I'm going to put the mychild component. And now mychild is complaining because we have a required property called name that's missing. So I'm going to go in here, and if I just say name equals quote, quote, Jeff, and I run that, then when I type in here, hey, where is it?
Oh, not again!
I restarted my VS Code to try and fix that extension, so let me type npm start again. And wait for that development server to start up. I'll just close this initial tab, let that one. Okay, so now we see hello from my child. My child sends back Jeff, and we still have our functionality from our main component here above the horizontal rule. So if we want, we can pass this name down instead, and we do that exactly like you think. We get rid of the quotes, we open up our curly braces, and we pass in name. And now every time name changes, right, my child sends back, there's nothing there, but anytime I type something in there,
whatever,
not only am I updating my parent component, but I'm also updating the child component. And if we inspect that, right, let me inspect that. And we'll also inspect that just to make sure that the tree is open enough for us to see. So now when I type, notice only the parts that change, and I can expand that some more, only the parts that change are updating. The rest of the UI stays unchanged because it doesn't need to update.
Awesome!
And so that's how you can pass data from a parent to a child. Okay, so I think that's a good stopping point for the real basics of React and how you communicate between components without getting into other state management systems and without getting complicated. What I'd like to do is push this code up to the repo, and in the next episode we're going to hook this up to a CI/CD build pipeline and have this thing auto deploy every time we make a change and push that change up to GitHub. We're going to have it deploy to a real website where we can test it and see it and work with it in a way that's public, so that there's always a latest version available. And you can set these systems up in large organizations where certain things get pushed to QA, some get to stage, some get to production. Of course, things will get tested before they can move to the next stage or into prod, obviously. But we can look at how to set all that up, and then as we make our changes, those changes will automatically get pushed. So I hope this was really cool, a good React primer, and if there's something specific with React or anything else that you want to learn, please let me know, and I will happily take it as a suggestion. See how I sidestepped telling you that we would do it? I'm like that. So remember always to practice, practice, practice. And please subscribe if you found this stuff helpful. I really appreciate it. And I will see you soon online.